In God's providential care, somehow, some way, as history marches on and the church's story continues, God's will is done. Every time there's a papal conclave, people wonder who's going to be the next pope. And I'm always asked, Father, who's going to be the next pope? Oftentimes you hear people answer, it doesn't matter because the Holy Spirit is going to pick the pope. But does that actually happen? Does the Holy Spirit pick the pope? I'm glad you asked. My name is Father Jerome Magat, and I'm the Vice Rector and a Professor of Moral Theology at St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park, California. In this video, we're going to examine an age-old traditional saying that the Holy Spirit picks the Pope. I like to put this under the rubric of a Catholic myth. So today, spoiler alert, I'm going to debunk the Catholic myth that the Holy Spirit picks the Pope. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere in Catholic doctrine or teaching, either by official pronouncement or any other document from the magisterial teachings of the Church, do we say anywhere that the Holy Spirit picks the Pope. What we do say is that the cardinal electors pick the Pope, and we hope that those cardinal electors are guided by the Holy Spirit. But as you may or may not know, the tradition of picking the Holy Father in the grandeur and splendor that we see today is actually not that ancient of a practice. It only goes back to the year 1271 in a little town north and east of Rome called Viterbo, a place you can still go to today. It takes us back to the conclave of 1268 to 1271. That's right. That first modern papal conclave took 33 months to decide who the Pope was going to be. Now, over the years, the number of cardinals who get to elect the Pope have changed. But back in 1268, and again, this is a 33-month-long conclave that finally came up with an answer in 1271, times were very different. In that particular period of history, there were no more than about 20 cardinal electors. Each of these cardinals represented one, more or less, of the 20 wealthiest Italian landed families in the Italian peninsula at the time known as the Papal States. All of these men had one thing in common. They were almost without exception the third-born son of that landed family who controlled vast tracts of land in modern-day Italy. And why the third son? Well, in the Ancien Regime, the old order of things, the way that cardinals became cardinals was quite a bit different than it is today. Back then, if you were the firstborn son, your lot in life was to run the family estate or the family business. When you were the second-born son, then you would be in charge of representing the family in the military. And the third-born son was responsible for becoming a member of the clergy. No vocation story, no vocation director, no real discernment. That was your job. So in the year 1268, the cardinals, again, practically all the third sons of the 20 largest or most prominent Italian families, gathered in this little town of Viterbo to elect the next pope. But of course, as you can imagine, amongst this group of 20, for it to last 33 months, there was quite a bit of squabbling. So the local hierarchy of dukes and duchesses and counts and countesses in the region had become rather frustrated that their town and their whole region had been overrun by all the paparazzi and all the delegations from each of these 20 families, that they had, after 33 months, decided it was finally time for them to come to a decision. And what were they really deciding? Well, they were looking for the man that they thought would best advance the interests of these 20 most landed families in Italy. So in the year 1271, after dozens and dozens of attempts to come up with a consensus candidate, the local duke went up on the roof with his henchmen, pulled open the roof, locked the cardinals in. That's where we get the word conclave, conclavus, meaning with the key, and then only fed them bread and water until they came up with a candidate. Soon, rains came, completely drenching all the cardinals, and they had an answer in 3 hours. And that, my friends, was the beginning of the modern papal conclave. Conclaves moved from Italy for a while to France, and then eventually back to Rome, where now they are ceremoniously celebrated, if you like, in the fabled Sistine Chapel, right between the Vatican Museums and St. Peter's Basilica. Now, I mention all of this not to make anyone jaded or scandalized about the way in which popes are selected, but to simply say that the Holy Spirit arranges all of the votes so that the best possible candidate is selected simply isn't true. Now, we know that in God's permissive will, he allows the cardinals to exercise their authority to select whom they believe will best lead the church in that particular era of history. But to say that the Holy Spirit is somehow appearing privately to the cardinals and appearing above the head of the right man is really simply a myth, and I'm happy to debunk it. Now, the Holy Spirit, as for all of us, can be listened to, but he can also be rejected. So whether or not the Holy Spirit picks the Pope in every single conclave, only God knows. But what God does know is that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. And even if the will of God was not enacted in a particular election, in God's providential care, somehow, some way, as history marches on and the church's story continues, somehow God's will is done. It remains largely mysterious, considering the fact that, unfortunately, in past eras, we've had some questionable occupants of the See of St. Peter. That's a historical fact, which we also shouldn't ignore. But the reality is that in the last several hundred years, the Catholic Church has been blessed with incredibly holy men. The vast majority of popes have been men who have led the church with sanctity and hopefully being guided and led by the Holy Spirit. So it's important for us to realize that this perhaps is some proof of the moral miracle of the church. And what I mean by that is this. If the Catholic Church were simply a man-made institution, and given some of the brief history I provided for you in this video, we would have collapsed centuries ago, been overrun by more powerful kings and queens and kingdoms and empires, but yet mysteriously and happily, our story continues. So even as we rejoice in the election of a Holy Father every time that it happens, and let's be honest, other than the coronation and the funeral of the English monarch, what other institution in the world gets as much free press than the Catholic Church does when a pope passes away and a successor is elected? It's really a remarkable feat of history. The entire world focuses in on Rome to see what will happen, to enjoy the pomp and the circumstance and the ceremony, and then finally, when the Holy Father is announced to the world, the white smoke billows from the top of the Sistine Chapel, and the bells toll around the city and around the world. The story of the church continues. So while the Holy Spirit may not pick the Pope, as many believe he does, we still believe, of course, that the Holy Spirit is with the church until the end of the age. If you like this video and other content like it, simply click on the link above. Thanks for watching.